1947, the United States recognized that they could use this OSS agency for worldwide intelligence gathering operations, not only just for times of war, but during times of peace as well. So the leaders of the White House were like, let's create a new agency and call them the Central Intelligence Agency. The other elites up there thought it was a great idea also. So the National Security Act of 1947 officially established the CIA with the intent to expand those former operations that the OSS was doing and to create a formal authority to oversee covert activities worldwide.
Now, let's fast forward a few years later to the early 1950s. At this time, it was the height of the Cold War. The United States and Soviet Russia definitely had some beef going on. Now, also at this time, some of the officials in the United States government started to fear that not only the Soviet Union, but the Chinese and the North Koreans were using mind control to brainwash U.S. prisoners of war that were in Korea.
Because of this, the United States didn't want to fall behind in research. So in 1953, the director of the CIA at the time, Allen Dulles, approved what was called Project MKUltra. This top-secret operation was aimed to develop techniques that the United States could use against enemies to control human behavior with drugs and other psychological manipulators.
Project MKUltra involved over 150 different types of human experiments, involving psychedelic drugs and electroshock therapy, to name just a few. Sometimes the test subjects knew they were participating in a study, but at other times, they had no idea.
Many of these tests were conducted at universities, hospitals, or prisons in the United States and Canada. For nearly 20 years, from the 1950s to the 70s, these CIA programs would see countless unsuspecting individuals exposed to drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, abuse, and torture.
Now, it's not clear how many people were involved or subjected to these tests, but before we discuss the experiments themselves, let's talk about how this all came to light.
Now, like we mentioned earlier, it's not clear how many people were involved or subjected to these tests. Why? Well, in 1973, the Watergate scandal happened, and at the time, the CIA director Richard Helms, who was overseeing these MKUltra experiments, got super nervous. He didn't want anyone looking around into what they were doing. So to be super safe, he ordered the destruction of all MKUltra documents.
So if all these documents were destroyed, how did they come to light? Well, in December of 1974, the New York Times released an article that said the CIA had been conducting illegal domestic activities on unsuspecting American citizens. This article prompted an investigation by Congress into the allegations, and they formed a committee to do this investigation.
Now, despite the head CIA dude ordering all the MKUltra documents to be destroyed, some survived. Around 20,000 of them. These documents escaped because they were financial papers and were stored elsewhere. So whenever the documents were being destroyed, these were overlooked. A FOIA, which Freedom of Information Act, was filed, and these documents were found in an abandoned warehouse.
Because these were financial papers, the documents didn't reveal much, other than the people involved and how much money was spent. The real discoveries of what happened were during the interviews that were done by the investigation committee that Congress had appointed.
So on August 3rd, 1977, there was a joint hearing in front of the United States Senate. They were to hear the testimony from the director of the CIA and other agency witnesses about documents that were found that detailed the testing conducted by the CIA, aka MKUltra.
So Edward Kennedy of Massachusetts, who was the chairman of the Health Subcommittee at the time, took the stand to answer the questions from the Senate in this joint hearing. The Senate then says to Edward Kennedy,
the Senate Health Subcommittee heard chilling testimony about the human experimentation activities of the CIA. The deputy director of the CIA revealed that over 30 universities and institutions were involved in an extensive testing and experimentation program, which included covert drug tests on unwilling citizens at all social levels, high and low, American citizens, and foreign citizens. Several of these tests involved the administration of LSD to unwilling subjects in social situations.
The CIA itself acknowledged that these tests made little scientific sense. The agents doing the monitoring were not qualified scientific observers. The test subjects were seldom accessible beyond the first several hours of the test. In a number of instances, the test subjects became ill for hours or days.
Other experiments were equally offensive. For example, heroin addicts were enticed into participating in LSD experiments in order to get a reward, which was heroin. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the fact that the extent of the experimentation on human subjects was unknown.
The records of all these activities were destroyed in January 1973 at the instruction of then CIA Director Richard Helms. In spite of persistent inquiries by the Intelligence Committee, no additional records or information was forthcoming, and no single individual could be found who remembered the details, not the director of the CIA who ordered the documents destroyed, not the official responsible for the program, nor any of his associates.
We believe that the record, incomplete as it was as complete as it was going to be. Then one individual, through a Freedom of Information Act, accomplished what two United States Senate committees could not. They spurred the CIA into finding additional records pertaining to the CIA's program of experimentation with human subjects.
These new records were discovered by the CIA in March. Their existence was not made known to the Congress until July. The records reveal a far more extensive series of experiments than had previously been thought.
86 universities and institutions were involved. New instances of unethical behavior were revealed. The intelligent community of this nation, which requires a shroud of secrecy in order to operate. The CIA's program of human experimentation in the 50s and 60s violated that trust, and it was violated again on the day the bulk of the agency's records were destroyed in 1973.
And that was what the Senate opened up with for their opening statement. But it doesn't stop here. After that opening statement, Admiral Stansfield Turner, who was the current director of the CIA at the time, went in front of everyone and read his prepared statement. He said the following:
In my letter on July 15, 1977, I reported our recent discoveries of 7 boxes of documents related to Project MKUltra, a closely held classified CIA project conducted from 1953 to 1964. As you may recall, MKUltra was an umbrella project, under which certain sensitive sub-projects were funded, involving among other things research on drugs and behavioral modification.
During these investigations in 1975, it became publicly known when details of the drug-related death of Dr. Frank Olson was published, which was in 1953. Dr. Olson, a civilian employee of the Army at Fort Detrick, leaped to his death from a hotel room window in New York City about a week after having unwittingly consumed LSD administered to him as an experiment at a meeting of LSD researchers put together by the CIA.
Most of what was known about the CIA's involvement with behavioral drugs during the investigations in 1975 was contained in a report on Project MKUltra. Until the recent discovery, it was believed that all the MKUltra files dealing with behavioral modification had been destroyed in 1973.
All right. So that was some highlights of the investigation to help you better understand how all this came to light. So I guess let's transition over to the juicy stuff.